In the suffocating heat of a suburban summer, the shimmering azure of Mark's private oasis beckoned. But then, a voice, sharp and entitled, sliced through the air. "This is our pool now." What followed was a battle of wills, a quiet invasion of peace, and one man's desperate act, executed under the shroud of night that left a gaping, concrete wound where beauty once thrived. Mark Jensen had poured his soul into the backyard of his modest suburban home. Not just money, though there was plenty of that sunk into the sparkling, custom-built pool, but sweat, dreams, and the quiet, solitary joy of creation. It wasn't a status symbol. It was his sanctuary. After 2 decades in the relentless churn of corporate finance, the turquoise rectangle nestled amongst meticulously tended hydrangeas and a small, vibrant herb garden represented everything. He craved peace, privacy, and a tangible reward for years of quiet perseverance. Every morning, before the sun crested the neighbor's roof, he'd slip into the cool, chlorinated embrace, letting the gentle current wash away the lingering stress of deadlines and demanding clients. Every evening, he'd sit by its edge, a cold, beer in hand, watching the automated cleaner glide across the bottom, the subtle hum a lullaby. The arrival of Karen Dubois, 3 houses down, had initially been met with polite nods and brief, strained smiles. She'd moved into the grandest house on the street, a 2-story monstrosity with more columns than a Roman temple, and from day one she'd exuded an aura of self-importance that grated on Mark's quiet sensibilities. Her children, a trio of boisterous, perpetually sticky-looking boys, seemed to possess a preternatural ability to ignore property lines, their soccer balls frequently landing in Mark's prize-winning petunias. He'd returned them with a forced pleasantness that dwindled with each retrieval. The first hint of the coming storm was subtle. Mark was trimming the hedges separating his property from the Dubois, a task he usually found meditative. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and noticed Karen's youngest, a tow-headed boy named Finn, standing on a patio chair in his own yard, openly staring over the hedge at the pool. Mark offered a small wave, but Finn didn't wave back, his eyes glued to the water, a flicker of something possessive in their young depths. A week later, he saw Finn and his older brother, Liam, leaning precariously over the hedge, their faces pressed against the leaves, whispering. He cleared his throat loudly, and they scurried away like startled squirrels. Then came the accidental trespasses. A brightly colored plastic dinosaur, then a deflated beach ball, then a child's sandal. Mark would retrieve them, placing them, carefully on the Dubois' doorstep, a silent message he hoped would be understood. It wasn't. Each time Karen would appear, not to apologize, but to offer a perfunctory, almost dismissive, "Oh, thanks," as if he were merely performing a service. The summer intensified, both in temperature and tension. One scorching afternoon, Mark was floating idly, a book propped on his chest, when a splash startled him. He sat up, his heart thudding. Liam, Karen's middle son, was standing on the edge of the pool, water dripping from his swimsuit, a triumphant grin on his face. Behind him, Finn was preparing to jump. "What are you doing?" Mark's voice was sharper than he intended, echoing in the sudden silence. Liam startled, his grin faltering. We were just hot." "This is private property," Mark said, his voice tightening. "You can't just come into my yard and use my pool." Karen appeared from behind her hedge, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face, a look of incredulity replacing her usual placid expression. "Mark, honestly, it's 95 degrees out there. The boys were just trying to cool off. It's perfectly harmless." "Harmless?" Mark pushed himself to the shallow end, standing. "Karen, they trespassed. This is my backyard, my pool." Karen stepped fully into view, her arms crossing. "Well, it's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? You have this enormous pool and those poor boys are sweltering. It just seems like such a waste not to share. She gestured around vaguely. This whole neighborhood is like a community after all. Mark stared at her, dumbfounded. Community? Karen, I paid for this pool. I maintain it. It's not a public park. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. It's just a bit of water. What's the big deal? She then turned to her sons. Boys, come on, let's go. Mr. Jensen is being a bit territorial. Liam and Finn scrambled out, casting furtive glances back at Mark as they followed their mother. Karen offered Mark a tight, pitying smile. We'll just consider this a friendly misunderstanding, shall we? It was anything but. Mark spent the rest of the day seething, the cool water doing little to calm the slow burn of indignation. He installed new, taller security cameras and put up no trespassing signs that were conspicuously visible from Karen's yard. He even considered a fence extension. But the HOA rules were strict, and he hated unnecessary barriers. For a few days, the peace held. The boys stayed on their side of the hedge. Mark started to breathe easier, hoping his message had finally gotten through. Then the complaints started. Karen, it turned out, was a master of passive-aggressive warfare, cloaked in the guise of neighborly concern. First, a letter from the HOA, citing an anonymous complaint about excessive chlorine odors emanating from Mark's property. Mark had his pool service company send a detailed report of their balanced chemical levels. Then, a flyer slipped under his door advertising a neighborhood safety meeting to discuss unmonitored residential hazards, clearly a thinly veiled reference to his pool. He attended the meeting only to find Karen holding court, subtly implying his pool was an unsupervised death trap. No direct accusations, just leading questions and concerned expressions. His stress levels, which the pool was supposed to alleviate, were now through the roof. He stopped enjoying his morning swims, constantly, scanning for encroaching shadows or telltale splashes. His evening relaxation was marred by the gnawing anxiety of what Karen would do next. One sweltering Saturday, Mark had guests, his sister Sarah and her 2 teenage daughters. They were splashing happily, the sound of their laughter a rare balm to his frayed nerves. Then, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump started from the Dubois' yard. Karen had set up a large, inflatable kiddie pool, complete with a small, sputtering fountain, directly on the other side of the hedge, precisely where it would emit the most irritating noise and visual intrusion. Her 3 boys, along with several others Mark didn't recognize, shrieked and splashed with a volume that seemed intentionally amplified. "Is that?" Sarah began, her brow furrowed. "That's Karen," Mark said, his voice flat. He tried to ignore it to focus on his niece's enjoyment, but the incessant thumping and screaming wore him down. Later that afternoon, Mark heard voices by his front door. He peered through the peephole and saw Karen, accompanied by 2 other women from the neighborhood he barely knew, pointing towards his backyard with exaggerated gestures, their heads close in conspiratorial whispers. He heard snippets. Such a shame. All that unused space. Children. He flung the door open. "Can I help you, ladies?" Karen jumped, startled, her smile instantly dissolving. "Oh, Mark, we were just admiring your landscaping. So well kept." Her voice was syrupy, laced with false sweetness. "Really?" Mark said. His eyes narrowed. "Because it looked a lot more like you were discussing my private property with people who have no business involving themselves." One of the other women, a stern-faced woman named Brenda who was active in the HOA, cleared her throat. "Well, Mr. Jensen, we were just expressing some concerns. The Dubois boys, lovely children, have mentioned how hot it gets and how your pool, so grand, sits empty for so much of the day. And with the recent heat wave, it just seems neighborly to consider sharing." Mark felt a vein throb in his temple. "Neighborly?" Karen, did you put these people up to this? Karen adopted an expression of wounded innocence. Mark, how could you suggest such a thing? These are concerned citizens just like me. My pool is not a community resource, Mark said, his voice rising. It's mine. Private. And I'm getting sick and tired of you and your children and now your little posse trying to dictate what I do with my own property. Brenda stepped forward, a patronizing look on her face. Mr. Jensen, perhaps you don't understand how neighborhood associations work. We have rules about nuisance, about community harmony. My pool is not a nuisance, Mark retorted. Your children trespassing, that's a nuisance. You're instigating, that's a nuisance. Karen's face hardened. You know what, Mark? This is becoming hostile. Maybe we should take this to the HOA board, officially. Maybe you should, Mark shot back, his frustration finally boiling over. Because I'm about 2 seconds away from calling the police for trespassing, and then we'll see who's being hostile. The women exchanged glances, and Karen, for once, seemed to lose her composure. Fine, she snapped. Then we'll do this the proper way. You'll regret being so unneighborly, Mark. They turned and marched away, Karen shooting him a venomous look over her shoulder. The next few weeks were a nightmare of escalating formal complaints. The HOA, typically sluggish, seemed to be spurred into action by Karen's relentless lobbying. Mark received official notices about noise complaints from his niece's laughter, unauthorized chemical disposal from his pool backwash, and even a ridiculous claim about his pool attracting mosquito. The morning sun, usually a welcome beacon of warmth, was a harsh, unforgiving spotlight. It illuminated the stark, brutal reality of Mark's choice. He stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug cold in his hand, and stared at the empty basin. The once shimmering turquoise was now a sickly, gray-stained concrete, the deep end a shadowy abyss, the main drain a gaping black eye. The expensive tiles, a soft blend of blue and white, now looked pathetic, clinging to the dry walls like scales on a dead fish. A few forgotten leaves, once dancing on the water's surface, were now brittle and still, stuck to the sides. It was no longer a pool. It was a scar, a monument to his defiance. A strange quiet filled the air, the absence of the water's gentle. The lack of the filtration system's rhythmic drone louder than any sound. It felt final. He had done it. He had taken his sanctuary and turned it into a weapon. A part of him felt a hollow ache, a loss that was profound and permanent. But another part, a cold, hard kernel of resolve, felt a grim satisfaction. She couldn't use it now. Her children couldn't trespass on it. The source of his torment was gone. The morning peace lasted exactly as long as it took for the Dubois boys to discover the wreckage. Mark heard the first shriek, high-pitched and full of disbelief. It was Finn. Then Liam's voice, a more drawn-out, confused cry. Mark watched as the two boys, in their swim trunks and with towels slung over their shoulders, sprinted to the edge of the pit. They stood there, silent and stunned, staring at the concrete void. Then they turned and ran back to their house, their shouts of, "Mom! Mom! The water's gone!" carrying across the still street. Mark braced himself. He didn't have long. He finished his coffee, put on his shoes, and walked outside, the morning air already thick with humidity. He stood at the edge of his now useless pool, arms crossed, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Karen emerged from her front door, a vision of suburban fury in a pristine white tennis skirt. She had no racket, no ball, just a face contorted in disbelief and rage. She marched across her lawn, her steps furious, and rounded the hedge, her eyes fixed on the empty pit. She stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open. She pointed a trembling finger, not at Mark, but at the pool. "What? What is this?" Her voice was a cracked whisper, utterly devoid of its usual condescending cheer. Mark looked at her, then down at the concrete. "It's my backyard," he said calmly, his voice a steady counterpoint to her rising panic. "And what used to be a swimming pool?" "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice regaining its full volume, sharp and accusatory. You drained it!" "Yes," Mark said simply. "I did." You can't just drain your pool," she sputtered, her hands clenching and unclenching. "It's my pool, Karen. I can fill it, I can empty it, I can turn it into a giant planter if I want to," Mark said, his voice flat, emotionless. "It is private property, and since it seemed to be causing so many issues with you and your family's understanding of that concept, I took care of the problem." "Took care of the problem?" Her face was now beet red, her composure completely gone. She was a woman utterly disarmed, her most powerful tool of manipulation, the children's need for the pool, now utterly worthless. "My children were looking forward to a swim. This is malicious. It's an act of war." "The war started when you let your kids trespass in my yard for the 10th time," Mark shot back, his own calm beginning to crack. "And it escalated when you started a whispering campaign and filed frivolous complaints with the HOA. I simply ended the campaign for the one thing you were really after." Their voices carried, and one by one heads began to pop out of neighboring windows. A man watering his lawn across the street froze, the hose falling limp in his hand. Mrs. Gable, the gossipy neighborhood matriarch, emerged from her front door with an inquisitive look. The spectacle was public. Karen, seeing her audience, adjusted her tactic. Her rage morphed into something more theatrical, more performative. "He's just being vindictive, everyone," she called out, turning to face the neighbors. "I simply suggested he could be more neighborly and share his pool with my poor boys during this heat wave, and this is what he did. He maliciously drained it just to spite me. What kind of person does that?" Mark's jaw tightened. "It's called protecting my property. You taught your children my pool was community property. It's not. I'm teaching you all the difference." Brenda, the HOA board member from before, was now at the edge of her own lawn, her arms crossed. "Mark, this is incredibly irresponsible. The heat, the stress on the community—" "The stress on the community?" Mark laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Brenda, the stress started when Karen began her crusade. Now the problem is solved." "It's not solved!" Karen cried, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "It's a hazard, an empty hole in the ground." "It's a concrete bowl," Mark corrected. "Less of a hazard than an unsupervised body of water wouldn't, you say?" Karen's eyes narrowed, a cold, calculating fury replacing her hot theatrics. She pulled out her phone and began dialing. "We'll see about that. This is vandalism. This is a public disturbance. I'm calling the police, right now. You can't just do this." Mark stood his ground, a wave of cold certainty washing over him. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll be right here." A squad car arrived within the hour. The officer, a young, patient-looking woman named Officer Reynolds, listened to both sides of the story, her face a mask of weary professionalism. Karen, tears now welling in her eyes, spun a dramatic tale of a cruel neighbor, a sweltering heat wave, and a community asset being maliciously destroyed. She showed the officer photos of the empty pool, the water's absence a tangible sign of her perceived injustice. Mark, in turn, was calm and methodical. He showed the officer his deed, the property line survey, the HOA's own rules on property, maintenance. He explained the escalating trespassing, the verbal warnings, the official complaints he had to answer. He pointed to the no trespassing signs. "And you decided to drain the pool?" Officer Reynolds asked, turning her steady gaze to Mark. "It was the only way to stop the trespassing and put an end to the harassment," Mark said simply. "It's my property. I pay the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance fees. I have the right to do what I want with it, as long as it's not illegal, and draining a private swimming pool is not illegal." Officer Reynolds sighed, a low sound of defeat. She turned to Karen, who was watching her with a hopeful, expectant expression. "Ma'am, based on Mr. Jensen's documentation and the fact that the property in question is entirely private, there's no crime here. This is a civil matter. It sounds like a neighborhood dispute." Karen's face crumpled. "A civil matter? He did this on purpose, to torment me." "That's a civil tort, ma'am, not a criminal one. I'm not a judge," the officer said, her tone firming. "My jurisdiction is criminal law. There's no vandalism. There's no trespassing. I suggest you contact your HOA or legal counsel. The police." Car pulled away, leaving Karen standing on the curb, utterly defeated. Her face was a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. Mark felt a small flicker of triumph. It was a victory, however small. The first battle had been won. He hadn't just drained the pool. He'd exposed her, and the police had, however inadvertently, validated his position. He went back inside, watching from his window as Karen stomped back to her house, muttering to herself. He expected more theatrical fury, perhaps a new round of HOA complaints. What he didn't expect was the chilling, quiet change in her demeanor. She stopped yelling. She went inside her house, and a strange, profound silence settled over the street. Hours passed. Mark tried to work, but he couldn't focus. The absence of the pool's hum was a constant reminder. The neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. He checked his phone. No new complaints. His email was quiet. The silence was unnerving. Then, just after lunch, a notification buzzed on his phone. A new post in the neighborhood's private social media group, Parkview Heights Community News. Mark wasn't a frequent user, but he was in it, as was everyone else on the street. The post was from Karen Dubois. The title was bolded, accusatory, and designed to shock. "Is there a predator in our community?" Mark's blood ran cold. He clicked. On the post, a sense of dread pooling in his gut. The text below was a long, rambling narrative, twisting every fact, every encounter. It started with her being a concerned mother who noticed things. It mentioned a creepy man who stares at children. It twisted his calm assertion of private property into hostile aggression, and his warnings about trespassing into threatening behavior. Then, it got truly vile. "We have been trying to get him to put up a fence, but he refuses. He has a perfect view of my children's playtime. He even drains his pool to spite them. I fear for the safety of my children and the children of our community with a man like this living here." The comments were already pouring in. "Oh, Karen, that's terrible. You need to call Child Protective Services." "What's his address? We should all be on the lookout." Mark stood there, his phone shaking in his hand. She hadn't just lost the first battle. She had retreated and opened a new front entirely, a far, more dangerous one. She wasn't fighting him over a pool anymore. She was fighting him over his reputation, his character, his entire life. The war had just gone personal, and he was standing alone against an entire community she had poisoned with her lies. The digital mob was swift and merciless. Mark watched, numb with shock and disbelief, as the comments section of Karen's post exploded. The vitriol was a tidal wave, each new comment a fresh shard of glass thrown at his reputation. They didn't know him. They didn't know the months of escalating harassment, the broken trust, the quiet despair. All they saw was Karen's narrative, a concerned mother protecting her children from a creepy, angry man who was maliciously draining his pool to spite a little boy. "Mark Jensen? I think he lives on Sycamore. Yeah, that's his house, with the empty pool. I've seen him before. He always looks so sullen. I had a bad feeling. Maybe we should organize a neighborhood watch, a community safety initiative." The last comment made Mark's blood run cold. They weren't just talking. They were talking about action. He tried to call David, his lawyer, but the call went to voicemail. He paced his living room, his mind a whirlwind of fury and panic. How could she do this? How could she lie so brazenly, so publicly, and so effectively? She had taken his act of self-preservation and twisted it into something monstrous. He wasn't a homeowner protecting his property. He was a potential threat to children. The accusation, so vile and baseless, felt like a physical blow. He knew he couldn't let it stand. He had to fight back, to defend himself. He logged into the community group, his fingers trembling. He started typing, a furious defense, laying out every detail. The trespassing, the HOA complaints, the police visit, the officer's dismissal of her claims. He hit post, a surge of defiant adrenaline coursing through him. The response was immediate and brutal. Why would you drain your pool just to spite her kids? That's sick. He's just trying to cover his tracks. Typical. Defensive much? A normal person would just put up a fence. Someone even posted a screenshot of his post, along with a mocking caption. The classic "I'm being harassed" defense. Sounds like something a sociopath would say. Mark watched, horrified, as his attempt at truth was twisted into further proof of his villainy. The digital mob wasn't interested in facts. They were interested in a good story, and Karen had given them a fantastic one, complete with a clear villain. He was a cautionary tale, a boogeyman, a source of entertainment for their online crusade. The next morning, the real-world repercussions began. A flyer was taped to his front door, a crudely drawn caricature of him with a scowling face, a red X over his mouth, and the words, "Neighborhood Nuisance," scrawled beneath it. His mailman, a friendly man named George, averted his eyes as he dropped a stack of mail into the box, not even offering his usual "morning mark." Later, a car slowed down as it drove past his house, the driver and passenger craning their necks to stare at the empty pool. One of them pointed and laughed. Mark felt a suffocating sense of isolation. His quiet, peaceful life was over. He was an outcast in his own home. Karen was everywhere and nowhere. Mark saw her in her front yard, her face carefully composed, talking on the phone and casting a sidelong glance at his house. She saw him looking and offered a saccharine, triumphant smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. She had won. The pool was a hollow victory. The war was no longer about property, it was about public opinion, and she had an army. He spent the weekend in a state of quiet despair. He called David again, this time getting through. Mark recounted the entire situation, his voice a tight coil of anger and humiliation. David listened patiently. "This is a whole different ballgame, Mark," David said, his voice grave. "This is libel, public defamation. We can sue her, but it's going to be messy, expensive, and it will only prolong the circus. It will also confirm to the community that you're a difficult man who sues his neighbors." "So what? I just let her get away with it? Let her destroy my life?" Mark's voice was ragged with frustration. "No," David said firmly. "But we can't fight this on her battlefield. You're trying to fight a war of truth in a place that values drama and emotion. We have to change the game." "How?" Mark asked, the word a desperate plea. "You need to stop talking," David instructed. "No more posts, no more comments, no more engaging with her or anyone in the neighborhood. You become an impenetrable wall. You give them nothing to use against you. And you let me handle the legal side. I'm going to send a cease and desist letter. We'll get her to remove the posts, at the very least." Mark, exhausted and out of options, agreed. He went silent. He ignored the stares, the whispers, the mocking glances. He became a ghost in his own home, retreating to his office, pulling the blinds down, living in a self-imposed exile. But the silence only seemed to fuel the fire. In the vacuum of his non-response, new lies took root. People in the group started speculating. He was clearly guilty. He was hiding something. Why else wouldn't he defend himself? The rumors began to take on a life of their own, spiraling into absurd conspiracy theories. The last straw came a week later. It was a Saturday morning, a beautiful, bright day. The sun was warm, and the air was finally less humid. Mark was in his backyard, a place he had avoided since the draining, staring at the empty pool. He had to figure out what to do with it. Fill it in? Turn it into a garden? He felt the weight of the decision, the permanence of his choice. He heard the faint sound of a lawnmower, then a sharp, distinct thunk. He walked to the edge of the empty pool and looked down. A small, dark object lay at the bottom, glinting, in the sun. He climbed down the ladder, his feet clanging on the dry metal rungs, and picked it up. It was a small plastic flashlight, a child's toy. But what made his heart lurch was what was taped to it. A photo. It was a picture of him. Taken from his front yard, a grainy, unflattering shot of him with a scowl on his face, his eyes closed. Below the picture, scrawled in a child's unsteady hand, was a single chilling phrase. "Dreen our eyes." Mark felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. He looked up at the Dubois' house. The kitchen light was on. A shadow moved behind the curtain. He wasn't just being harassed anymore. He wasn't just the target of gossip. He was being watched. His home was no longer his sanctuary. It was a hunting ground. The game had just changed, and it had just become terrifyingly real. Mark stood at the bottom of the empty pool, the sickeningly sweet scent of old chlorine and damp concrete filling his nostrils. The small plastic flashlight felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He stared at the note, the childish scrawl a chilling indictment. "Dreen our eyes. Drain our eyes." He was no longer just the neighborhood nuisance. He was a target. His quiet suburban war had just turned into a cold psychological assault. He climbed the ladder, his mind a furious torrent of fear and rage. The go-silent strategy was a catastrophic failure. It had been an open invitation for Karen and her accomplices to escalate, to fill the vacuum with their lies and intimidation. He had tried to be the bigger person, the reasonable man, and it had almost cost him everything. He looked at the window of the Dubois' kitchen. The shadows were gone, but he knew someone had been watching him. They wanted him to know. He went inside and locked the back door, then all the windows, a primal instinct to secure his home now in control. He pulled the blinds tight, plunging his house into a self-imposed twilight. The fear was a cold, bitter taste in his mouth, but it was quickly replaced by a white-hot resolve. He wasn't going to be a victim. He wasn't going to let them win. He was done being silent. That evening, he was a man transformed. He wasn't eating or sleeping, he was building. He ripped out the cheap, obvious security cameras from his front yard and replaced them with a state-of-the-art system. He mounted tiny, nearly invisible cameras in the eave of his roof, and another discreet one in a decorative birdhouse. They were equipped with high-resolution night vision and motion sensors that captured every detail. He even set up a camera pointing directly at the empty pool, the place of his recent torment. He wasn't just recording for security, he was gathering evidence. He would give her enough rope to hang herself. The next day, the harassment continued, but Mark's reaction was different. A group of kids on bikes stopped in front of his house, staring at the empty pool and yelling, "Hey, empty pool guy! You drain our water?" Mark watched them from behind his blinds, a silent, predatory focus in his eyes. He didn't react. He let the cameras do the work. He began a new routine, one of constant vigilance. He worked in his office, but his computer screen was now a mosaic of security feeds. Every time a car slowed down, every time a neighbor cast a furtive glance, every time a shadow fell on his lawn, he was watching. He started to notice things. A teenage girl on her phone walking past his house multiple times. He didn't recognize her. A different car, a beat-up sedan he hadn't seen before, parked on the street for an unusually long time. He cross-referenced the license plate with a public database, but it was registered to a rental agency. The stalking wasn't just Karen, it was a coordinated effort. She had an army, and they were all operating under her command. One afternoon, he saw Brenda, the stern HOA board member, walking her small dog. She paused in front of his house, not to stare, but to look at the empty pool with a strange expression. It wasn't disdain, it was something else. Puzzlement, a flicker of doubt. The sight was so unusual that Mark felt a tiny spark of hope. The next day, Mark was at the grocery store, a place he had avoided. He saw Mrs. Gable, the gossipy neighborhood matriarch, at the end of an aisle. She saw him, her eyes wide with surprise, and quickly turned her shopping cart the other way. He watched her retreat, but as he rounded the corner, he heard her on her phone. "He's here. It's him. The empty pool guy. It's so creepy." The words stung, but he felt a cold relief. He wasn't paranoid. This was real. As the days turned into a long, tense week, the silence from the Dubois house became even more unnerving. Mark saw Karen's car in the driveway, her boys playing basketball, but no one was coming near his house. She knew he was watching. The predator had suddenly become prey. But Mark knew it was a ruse. She was too proud, too vengeful to give up. The silence was just the calm before the storm. He was sure of it. Then, late one night, a motion sensor alert flashed on his monitor. He switched to the live feed from the camera pointing at the empty pool. A figure, small and furtive, moved through his yard. It was a child, wearing a hoodie, its face obscured. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. It was one of Karen's sons. He crept to the edge of the pool, and from his vantage point, Mark could see a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The child was searching the empty concrete basin. "He wants to find it," Mark murmured to himself, his breath fogging the window pane. "He wants to find what I threw away." The child was in the deep end now, the flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. Mark watched, his hand gripping the edge of the desk, every muscle in his body coiled. He was about to act, to yell, to turn on the lights. But then another figure stepped into the frame. It was Karen. She was dressed in black, her face a pale oval in the dark. She was holding her phone, its light glowing on her face. She whispered something to the child, a sharp, impatient command. The child climbed the ladder out of the pool, but as he did, his foot slipped. He let out a yelp of surprise, and the flashlight clattered to the concrete bottom, its beam pointing straight up. The fall was clumsy, but not serious. Karen was there in a flash, pulling the child to his feet, her whisper turning into a hissed, angry tirade. "You idiot! Be quiet! You almost got us caught!" Mark zoomed in on the camera feed. He saw Karen's face, contorted not with motherly concern, but with cold, calculating fury. He also saw something else. The child wasn't one of the younger boys. It was Max, the teenage son. The same boy who had scoffed at him, the same boy who had been in his pool that day. He was now a co-conspirator in his mother's malicious game. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. As Karen pulled Max up, she saw the flashlight on the concrete floor. She sighed in exasperation, but instead of retrieving it, she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small Ziploc bag and a piece of paper. She looked around, her eyes darting nervously, but she didn't look up at the cameras. She didn't. "No, we're there." She placed the Ziploc bag and the piece of paper in Max's hand. "Here," she hissed. "Don't mess this up. Drop this in the pool. Right where he'll find it." Max nodded, his face pale with fear, and with a practiced motion he tossed the bag and the paper into the empty pit. The camera feed, with its superior resolution, captured every detail. The paper fluttered, and for a split second Mark could make out a few words scrawled on it before it landed on the concrete. "Call CPS, child abuse." Mark's blood ran cold. a mix of shock and dawning clarity. He hadn't found a note in the pool. They had planted it. The first one. The second. All of it was a meticulously orchestrated campaign to frame him. This wasn't just about a pool or a property line. It was a calculated attempt to destroy him. His eyes fell on the video feed of Karen's face as she watched Max drop the bag. She was smiling, a cruel, triumphant smirk. He was no longer staring at the face of a frustrated neighbor. He was staring into the cold, calculating eyes of a sociopath. He had her. The video, with its crystal-clear resolution and timestamp, was irrefutable proof. The game was over. The video evidence was a digital crucifix, a damning confession played out in silent, high-definition clarity on Mark's computer screen. He watched the time-stamped footage over and over again, the details burning into his mind. Karen's cruel, triumphant smirk, Max's fearful, practiced motions, the Ziploc bag and the piece of paper with its vile, handwritten lie. The note he had found weeks ago, the one that had plunged him into a spiral of paranoia and fear, was not a threat from a stalker. It was a prop, planted by the very person who had orchestrated the entire campaign. Karen wasn't just a malicious gossip. She was a sociopath, a master manipulator who saw her neighbors as pieces on a chessboard and his life as a game to be won. A cold, righteous fury replaced the fear that had been his constant companion for weeks. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was the one holding the cards. He was the one who had been telling the truth all along. He had the irrefutable proof, and he knew exactly how he was going to use it. He spent the next hour meticulously crafting his final post. It wasn't a rant or a defense. It was a cold, clinical presentation of facts. He wouldn't post the full video. Not yet. He would first offer a preview, a tantalizing glimpse of the truth that would force them to confront their own complicity. He began his post with a short, simple statement. For weeks, I have endured a campaign of public harassment and vicious lies. The time for silence is over. He then attached a high-resolution, cropped image from the night vision footage. It showed a single damning frame. Karen's face, bathed in the sickly green light of the camera, looking straight down, her expression, one of cold, calculating malice, as she handed the note to her son. The image was grainy, but her expression was unmistakable. Below it, he simply wrote, "This is a preview of the video I have. It shows what truly happened the night the fake harassment began." He attached another image, a clear close-up of the note she had made Max drop. This one was even more explicit. He typed out the transcription below it. "Call CPS, child abuse." He then hit post. The silence that followed was heavier than the one after he had drained the pool. It lasted for a full, agonizing hour. Then, just like a dam breaking, the comments started to flood in. "What is this, Mark? That's Karen, isn't it? Oh my God, is this real?" Karen herself was one of the first to respond. Her comment was a torrent of rage, denial, and threats. "This is slander! You photoshopped this! I'm calling the police! This is a deliberate attempt to defame me! You're sick!" But her furious denials only made the image more believable. Mark didn't respond. He waited. Within a few minutes, Brenda, the HOA board member who had been so quick to judge him, posted a comment. "This is deeply disturbing. Mark, please tell me you have a full video." The request was a signal. Mark took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the mouse. This was it. He uploaded the full time-stamped video file, complete with sound, to a private video hosting service and linked it in a new comment. The post was short and to the point. For those who asked, the truth in full. The file is large, so it may take a moment to load. The video link was clicked, and a slow, creeping horror began to spread through the community group. People watched in silence as Karen's elaborate scheme was laid bare. They saw her whisper to her son. They heard her angry tirade when he stumbled. They saw her plant the evidence, and they saw her cold, triumphant smirk. They saw the truth, unvarnished and undeniable. One by one, the apologies began to trickle in, hesitant at first, then a flood. "Mark, I am so sorry. I can't believe I fell for her lies." "This is insane. We all owe you an apology." I took down my comment. "I'm mortified. I hope you can forgive us." The digital mob turned on Karen with the same speed and ferocity with which it had turned on Mark. Her post was buried under a deluge of accusations, condemnation, and calls for her removal from the neighborhood. Karen, seeing her army turn against her, went silent. Her profile picture vanished. Her name was scrubbed from the comments. She had been publicly and utterly humiliated. The next day, Mark's house was no longer a spectacle of scorn. It was a place of quiet reverence. People who had been shunning him now gave him shy, apologetic nods. His mailman, George, approached his door, not with a tight-lipped scowl, but with a bouquet of flowers and a heartfelt, "I am so sorry, Mark. We should have known better." Mark received a letter from David, his lawyer. It was a single sheet of paper. "Cease and desist issued. Libel case prepared. They've been served. They have 48 hours to remove all posts and issue a public apology, or we move forward with the lawsuit. We're also filing for a restraining order. The police are aware of her continued harassment and stalking behavior. This is over, Mark." But it wasn't over for Karen. The consequences of her actions were just beginning. She had gone to war over a perceived injustice, and she had lost spectacularly. A few weeks later, a for sale sign was staked into the Dubois' pristine front lawn, a silent white testament to her defeat. The gossip in the neighborhood group was that she and her family had been run out of town. Mark never saw her again. Stood in his backyard, his hands in his pockets, staring down at the concrete bowl that had been his pool. The air was cool and crisp, and the sky was a perfect cloudless blue. He had won. He had his reputation back and his peace, but the cost was immense. He had lost his sanctuary, the place he had poured so much of himself into. He walked to the edge and looked down, not at a void, but at an empty canvas. He saw the shimmering heat lines coming off the concrete. He saw the dry, cracked surface, and then he saw an opportunity. He got in touch with a contractor. They wouldn't fill it in. They would transform it. He would turn the hollow basin into a magnificent, sunken garden, a lush green paradise filled with hydrangeas, lavender, and vibrant, life-affirming color. The space would be beautiful and safe, a new kind of sanctuary. He was still alone in his victory, but he no longer felt isolated. He had been through a fire, and he had come out the other side. He had fought a battle and won not with physical force, but with patience and truth. The concrete scar in his yard would be a reminder of the darkness he had faced, but the garden that would soon grow there would be a testament to the light. The war was over, and he was finally, truly, home.